Now bring Russia and China into this picture because the role of Iran's two most important strategic partners is the most consequential and the most misrepresented dimension of this crisis. The straightforward narrative that Russia and China have stood by Iran throughout the war is accurate as far as it goes, but it does not go far enough to capture what is actually happening. Russia has been arming Iran through the Caspian Sea corridor. Shahid-2 drones, artillery ammunition, tank components, satellite intelligence from Russian ground stations, GLONASS navigation guidance, and IRG targeting experts physically embedded inside Russian satellite facilities. China provided the GGS-1B spy satellite that Iran used to photograph Prince Sultan Air Base before and after striking it. China confirmed yuan-denominated payments at the Strait of Hormuz. Russia's foreign minister called his Iranian counterpart on the first day of the war. Putin personally congratulated Mojtaba Khamenei on his appointment as supreme leader, said he was confident Mojtaba would honor his father's path, and pledged Russia's steadfast support. Neither Russia nor China voted for the UN Security Council resolution demanding Iran halt its attacks on Gulf states. Both have provided consistent diplomatic cover throughout the conflict, and yet, the Washington Institute's detailed tracking of Russian and Chinese statements throughout the war reveals a pattern that complicates the simple axis of solidarity story. Both Moscow and Beijing have been pushing Iran toward a ceasefire and a negotiated settlement consistently from the earliest weeks of the conflict. Russia welcomed the April 8 ceasefire immediately and expressed hope for peace talks to follow. Russia offered to take Iran's enriched uranium as part of a political settlement, offering, in effect, to help Iran avoid surrendering its nuclear program on American terms by internationalizing its disposal. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi made 26 phone calls to parties in the conflict in the first 6 weeks alone. China and Pakistan jointly issued a 5-point peace initiative on March 31st. Beijing urged Iran to accept the Pakistan-mediated ceasefire proposal in the days before April 8, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed Chinese involvement in the ceasefire negotiations on the day it was announced. The Washington Post noted, with the most significant phrase in its coverage, that Beijing urged Iran to accept a ceasefire but has not agreed to act as a guarantor of the deal. That refusal to guarantee is the key. China pushed Iran toward the exit. China declined to be responsible for what happens after Iran walks through it. Russia offered to help Iran dispose of its enriched uranium, an offer that serves Iran's survival while simultaneously helping Iran accept terms it could not accept on American terms. Alone, both countries are supporting Iran's existence while nudging it toward an end to a war that neither Moscow nor Beijing can afford to continue indefinitely. This is not abandonment. It is the specific, calculated form of pressure that major powers apply to smaller allies fighting wars those major powers need to end, not because they have stopped caring about the ally, but because the allies' continued fighting is costing them too. The economic logic behind that calculation is concrete and accelerating. China's economy cannot absorb an indefinite Hormuz closure. Approximately 20% of global oil trade passes through the strait, and China is its largest single consumer. Russia, meanwhile, is deriving diminishing benefit from the war's oil price spike because Ukraine's drone campaign against Russian energy infrastructure has limited Moscow's ability to fully capitalize on elevated prices. Both need the strait open. Both need a stable Iran that can sustain its strategic relationships with Moscow and Beijing over the long term. Neither needs an Iran that fights to the last IRG commander in a war it cannot win militarily, especially not while Iran's economy is collapsing under the weight of what is happening. The economic numbers establish a timeline that Iran's partners are clearly reading. The IMF projects Iran's real GDP will contract by 6.1% in 2026, the sharpest contraction since the sanctions tightening after 2018. Consumer prices are projected to rise 68.9% this year. Food basket costs had already increased more than 130% by March 2026. The U.S. naval blockade has cut Iran's oil exports by approximately 70%. Domestic oil storage is at 60% capacity and approaching forced production curtailment. The blockade cost Iran an estimated $4.8 billion in oil revenue in its first 18 days alone. Iran's own government assessed total economic damage at between $300 billion and $1 trillion as of April 11th. There is a mathematical endpoint to this. It does not extend indefinitely. Russia knows it. China knows it. And the Iranian officials who are actually governing, the ones negotiating in Islamabad, writing the statements that appear under Mojtaba's name, managing the IRG's institutional pressures while trying to construct a deal the IRG's hardliners will accept, they know it too. The specific proposals that have come closest to a settlement reveal the precise shape of the gap that remains. Pakistan's 15-point proposal, delivered to Iran on March 25th, included an end to Iran's nuclear program, limits on its missile capabilities, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, restrictions on Iran's support for armed groups, and sanctions relief in return. Iran rejected it. Iran's own five-point counterproposal included security guarantees against future aggression, war reparations, and international recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. The distance between those two positions is enormous, but it has been narrowing, a fractured government managing internal competition. Between hardliners and pragmatists is a government in which the pragmatists know what terms are necessary and the hardliners know that accepting those terms will look like surrender. The question is not whether the arithmetic eventually forces a deal. The question is who has the authority to authorize it in a way that binds the IRG, and that question brings everything back to the invisible man in calm. The IRG commanders who are filling the power vacuum created by Khamenei's incapacitation are not calculating in the same register as Xi Jinping calculating about China's oil supply or Putin calculating about Ukraine's diplomatic situation. They are calculating in the register of ideological commitment of the war they have spent their careers preparing for, the Shia Islamic theology that frames this conflict as a cosmic struggle between the forces of resistance and the forces of arrogance, and the specific institutional interest of an organization that has become more powerful than at any previous point in its history precisely because the civilian and religious leadership above it has been decimated by American and Israeli strikes. The IRG has more authority now in the vacuum than it has ever held before. Accepting a ceasefire that constrains Iran's nuclear program or formally surrenders Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz means accepting terms that shrink that authority permanently. That is not a calculation that yields easily to economic arithmetic. What Russia and China are managing through their sustained diplomatic pressure, their ceasefire advocacy paired with their careful refusal to formally guarantee any deal, is the space between Iran's need to survive and Iran's current inability to authorize the compromise that would secure that survival. They are pushing Iran toward the door while leaving Iran to walk through it alone. That is not indifference to Iran's fate. It is the sober recognition that if Russia or China formally guarantees a deal, they own whatever happens to Iran afterward. Neither is willing to own that, so they push, they call. Wang Yi makes his 26 phone calls, Russia offers to take the uranium, and they wait for the internal dynamics inside Tehran to produce someone with the authority and the political standing to sign something that actually holds. The ceasefire is holding technically, barely. IRG fast attack boats continue probing the blockade line. 2 Indian-flagged vessels still carry the damage from post-ceasefire gunfire. The negotiations continue in Islamabad. The statements continue to appear under Mojtaba Khamenei's name, typed and unsigned in any verifiable sense. Delivered by others on his behalf, the AI-generated videos continue to circulate on Iranian state media, doing the work that a recovering man with a prosthetic leg and burned lips cannot currently do himself. The cardboard cutout memes continue to spread on the social media platforms that Iran's internet shutdown cannot fully suppress. In Moscow, Putin continues to describe Russia as a reliable partner. In Beijing, Wang Yi continues making phone calls and urging peace. In Qom, Mojtaba Khamenei is being treated for severe injuries and may or may not be fully conscious of how far the system he officially leads has moved toward governing itself without him. In Islamabad, Pakistani intermediaries are trying to bridge the gap between what Iran's diplomats understand is necessary and what Iran's IRG hardliners will accept, knowing that the authority to close that gap, the decision that would make any deal binding on every actor inside the Islamic Republic, is not currently available from the person constitutionally required to provide it. That is the real crisis inside the crisis, not the blocked strait, not the naval blockade, not the mine clearance timelines, the invisible man, the AI supreme leader, the cardboard cutout in Qom. And a war that continues not because anyone holding real authority over all of its levers has decided it should go on, but because no one holding real authority over all of its levers is currently present to decide anything else. There is a war underway in the Middle East, and the man who holds ultimate authority over the country fighting it has not been seen in public for more than 60 days. No verified video, no authenticated audio, no confirmed proof of physical presence. In his place, typed statements delivered by others, and an AI-generated video released by state television that fooled no one, least of all the Iranian people who had already given their supreme leader a name. They call him the AI supreme leader. That name is not just mockery. It is a precise description of a power vacuum that is reshaping the diplomacy, the ceasefire negotiations, and the strategic calculations of every major power involved in this conflict. Mojtaba Khamenei became Iran's supreme leader on March 9, 2026, 10 days after his father was killed in the opening strikes of the war. He has not appeared publicly since February 28. Reuters, citing sources close to his inner circle, reported severe facial and leg injuries. The New York Times reported that one leg has undergone 3 operations and that he is awaiting a prosthetic fitting, that one hand is recovering from surgery, and that burns to his face and lips have made speech difficult. A diplomatic memo based on US Israeli intelligence shared with Gulf allies, obtained by the Times of Israel, stated plainly that Mojtaba Khamenei is being treated in common a severe condition and is unable to participate in any decision-making. CNN documented the cardboard cutout memes circulating on Iranian social media within days of his appointment. The memes came first, the journalism confirmed them. To understand why this matters beyond the biographical or the medical, you have to understand what the supreme leader actually is inside Iran's constitutional order. He is not a figurehead. He is not a head of state in the ceremonial sense. He is the system. He commands the armed forces. He appoints and dismisses the IRG commander. He determines the direction of foreign and domestic policy. Every major decision flows either upward to him for authorization or downward from his office with his approval already attached. The entire architecture of the Islamic Republic is designed to concentrate final authority in a single person, and that person is currently in a hospital in Qom with a prosthetic leg pending and burns on his face that make speech difficult. What fills that vacuum is not an orderly succession of authority. It is a fractured coalition. Time magazine's analysis, written by Hamid Reza Azizi of the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, described it with precision since the war began. The Islamic Republic has been operating less as a hierarchy organized around a single dominant figure and more as a hardline coalition managing war, diplomacy, and internal competition simultaneously. A coalition, not a government, not a chain of command. A negotiation among institutional actors with different interests and different thresholds for compromise being conducted at the worst possible moment, in the middle of the worst crisis the Islamic Republic has faced in its 47-year history. The practical consequences of that fracture became visible to the entire world on April 17th. Foreign Minister IRGC announced that the Strait of Hormuz was open to commercial shipping. Markets responded immediately. Oil prices dropped 11%. There was 24 hours of genuine documented hope that the crisis was moving toward resolution. And then the IRG, without consulting IRGC, without seeking presidential approval, closed the strait again. They reversed the foreign minister's public announcement without apology, without explanation, without any apparent concern about the diplomatic damage, because the IRG does not answer to the foreign minister. It answers to the supreme leader, and the supreme leader is in Qom. That episode was not an anomaly. It was a demonstration. IRGC can negotiate, Parliament Speaker Galibaf can authorize, President Pezeshkian can ratify. But none of them can make a commitment on behalf of the Islamic Republic of Iran that the IRG is bound to honor, because the IRG's chain of command runs through the office that is currently occupied by an invisible man. Abdul Reza Davari, a former advisor to Ahmadinejad whose assessment was cited in Modern Diplomacy's analysis, described Mojtaba's governing style as that of a board director, who appoints trusted members and relies on senior Revolutionary Guard commanders to handle major defense and foreign policy matters. In wartime, that model requires the board director to be reachable. He is not reachable in any way that outside parties can verify. The statements released under his name, read on state television by others, posted on social media by staff, have become in CNN's framing cover for Iranian negotiators to protect their positions from internal criticism, not governance, cover. The AI-generated video Iranian state television released showing Khamenei entering a war room and examining a map of Israel's nuclear research facility at Dimona was the moment that cover failed publicly. Within hours, international media had confirmed it was computer-generated, the regime that had spent nearly 5 decades presenting the supreme leader as the embodiment of divine authority, the source of legitimacy for a system, claiming to govern in accordance with God's will and the guidance of the hidden imam, was generating digital simulations because the actual person could not appear. The Iranian people who made the cardboard cutout memes had already understood what the AI video confirmed. They were simply saying in the language of satire what the journalists then verified in sourced reporting. The first major test of the invisible leader's symbolic authority came at Nowruz Persian New Year on March 20, 2026. Every supreme leader since 1979 has addressed the nation at Nowruz. It is not a bureaucratic formality. It is an act of political presence, a visible declaration that the revolution endures, and that the system's leader stands with his people as they begin a new year. Mojtaba released a written statement. No video, no audio, no image that intelligence services could confirm was recent. CIA officers described the absence of a video as, in their words, a big red flag. President Pezeshkian, accepting his own personal security risk, released a video message for Nowruz. The contrast required no commentary. The president, whose constitutional authority is formally subordinate to the supreme leaders, was more publicly present than the supreme leader himself.